Hello, 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 hello. Hi, hi, hi. I thought, in honor of Halloween being just around the corner, I would read some of the stories from the original Scary Stories books by Alvin Schwartz, with the drawings by Stephen Gammell. I know a new set of these came out a few years ago with a different illustrator, but these are the ones I grew up reading, and I love these books so much. They're the primary reason I love horror stories so much today, and some of these stories have literally scarred me for life, so, but in a good way. I love them. And I do have all three books here in this box set. And it says right here, beware, these stories may give you clammy palms, goosebumps, the shivers, and other signs of fright. Beware, 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 beware. Now I'm only going to, let's see, yep, there's 3, there's 2. I'm only going to do the first book in this video, but I'll probably do one video per book. So. I'm not going to read every story, but I'll pick out my favorites. And the stories are really good. They're pretty, common folklore, urban legends and stuff. But the best thing about these books is obviously the illustrations. And these books came out, I'm curious what year they were initially published. 1986, first edition, 1986. Oh, but the text, that was the first hardcover edition. I didn't know they had hardcovers. But the text copyright is for 1981. I don't know if that'll matter to you. So, but yeah, as a kid, I just loved the stories and the illustrations. As an adult, I really, really love folklore and urban legends. So it's kind of, this is actually a decent collection of folklore, and he actually lists where all of this, not all of the stories, but most of the stories are like adapted from something, or where he pulled them from to put them in here. So that's really cool. So you can track down the other stories that he read in order to pull his stories, kind of follow where the story originated from. Another book that I used to read all the time that I don't own was just called Urban Legends. And it was just a collection of well-known urban legends, a little bit of information about where they came from and stuff. So maybe I'll try to find that book and read that too. Maybe I should, before I read, I'm going to pull my camera down closer. That's better. Okay. Scary stories to tell in the dark. I've actually got other books by Alvin Schwartz here, and I've only read the Scary Stories books, but it looks like he has a lot of fun folklore books that aren't in the scary vein of things, like Tomfoolery, Trickery and Foolery with Words, or Whoppers, Tall Tales and Other Lies. This chapter is filled with jump stories you can use to make your friends jump with fright. I probably won't read any of these. This one's probably one of my favorites though. Me Tai Do Ti Walker. Me Tai Do Ti Walker. And it's just, you get aggressively more loud throughout the story, so if I'm trying to be quiet and relaxing, it's probably not the best story for this. But like, how would that not be terrifying for a kid? And I think at the very end of the story, look at that, suddenly a bloody head fell out of the chimney. How was I reading this as a kid? Okay. And this one even has like feet coming down a chimney. He heard footsteps coming up the cellar stairs. There are ghosts in this chapter. One comes back as a real person. Another takes revenge on her murderer. And there are other strange happenings. Sorry, that was out of frame. Look at that. Let's read the thing. Ted Martin and Sam Miller were good friends. They spent a lot of time together. On this particular night, they were sitting on a fence near the post office talking about one thing or another. There was a field of turnips across the road. Suddenly, they saw something crawl out of the field and stand up. It looked like a man, but in the dark it was hard to tell for sure. Then it was gone. But soon it appeared again. It walked halfway across the road. Then it turned around and went back into the field. Then it came out a third time and started toward them. By now, Ted and Sam were scared, and they started running. But when they finally stopped, they decided they were being foolish. They weren't sure what had scared them, so they decided to go back and get a better look. Pretty soon they saw it, for it was coming to meet them. It was wearing black pants, a white shirt, and black suspenders. Sam said, "I'm going to try to touch it, then we'll know if it's real." He walked up to it and peered into its face. It had bright, penetrating eyes sunk deep in its head. It looked like a skeleton. Ted took one look and screamed, and again he and Sam ran. But this time the skeleton followed them. When they got to Ted's house, they stood in the doorway and watched it. It stayed out in the road for a while, then it disappeared. A year later, Ted got sick and died. Toward the end, Sam sat up with him every night. The night Ted died, Sam said he looked just like a skeleton. This is The White Wolf. This is probably one of my favorite stories in these books. I haven't reread them in a long time, but I still remember loving this one, so hopefully it holds up. The timber wolves around French Creek had gotten out of hand. There were so many wolves, the farmers could not stop them from killing their cattle and sheep, so the state put a bounty on them. It would pay a hunter $10 for every wolf pelt. It would pay a hunter $10 for every wolf pelt he turned in. A butcher in town named Bill Williams thought that was pretty good money. He stopped working as a butcher and started killing wolves. He was good at it. Every year he killed over 500 of them. That came to more than $5,000. It was quite a bit of money in those days. After 4 or 5 years, Bill had killed so many wolves, there were hardly any left in that area. So he retired and he vowed never to harm another wolf because wolves had made him rich. Then, one day, a farmer reported that a white wolf had killed 2 of his sheep. He had shot at it and hit it, but the bullets didn't have any effect. Soon that wolf was seen all over the countryside, killing and running, but nobody could stop it. One night it came into Bill's yard and killed his pet cow. Bill forgot about his decision never to harm another wolf. He went into town the next morning and bought a young lamb for bait. He took it out into the hills and tied it to a tree. Then he backed off about 50 yards and sat down under another tree. With his gun in his lap, he waited. When Bill didn't come back, his friends started looking for him. Finally, they found the lamb. It was still tied to a tree. It was hungry, but it was alive. Then they found Bill. He was still sitting against the other tree, but he was dead. His throat had been torn open. But there was no sign of a struggle. His gun hadn't been fired, and there were no tracks in the soil around him. As for the white wolf, it was never seen again. That one's obviously some kind of allegory for you reap what you sow. But from a human perspective, if you have so many wolves, they're killing all your livestock, it makes sense to kind of control or cull their population. But as a kid, I was like, yeah, get him, white wolf. You show him for killing all your wolf friends. Oh, I love this illustration. This is definitely on my list of if I was going to get a scary stories to tell in the dark tattoo. This one would be one of the contenders. The guests. A young man and his wife were on a trip to visit his mother. Usually they arrived in time for supper, but they had gotten a late start and now it was getting dark. So they decided to look for a place to stay overnight and go on in the morning. Just off the road, they saw a small house in the woods. Maybe they rent rooms, the wife said, so they stopped to ask. That's such a weird concept to me, even as a kid. Not to bust open the story, but this is my video, so you just pay attention. I would never walk up to some random house in the middle of the night just to ask if I could stay there. Like, weird. Even if they do rent out rooms, it's not like they saw a hotel, they saw a random house. An elderly man and woman came to the door. They didn't rent rooms, they said, but they would be glad to have them stay overnight as their guests. They had plenty of room and they would enjoy the company. The old woman made coffee and brought out some cake, and the 4 of them talked for a while. Then the young couple were taken to their room. They again explained that they wanted to pay for this, but the old man said he would not accept any money. The young couple got up early the next morning before their hosts had awakened. On a table near the front door, they left an envelope with some money in it for the room. Then they went on to the next town. They stopped in a restaurant and had breakfast. When they told the owner where they had stayed, he was shocked. "That can't be," he said. "That house burned to the ground, and the man and woman who lived there died in the fire." The young couple could not believe it, so they went back to the house. Only now there was no house. All they found was a burned-out shell. They stood staring at the ruins, trying to understand what had happened. Then the woman screamed. In the rubble was a badly burned table, like the one they had seen by the front door. On the table was the envelope they had left that morning. I always thought that one was really sweet. It didn't scare me as a kid. I was like, just some ghosts taking care of some people. There's a few stories in here that are actually pretty wholesome. In all the books, I don't know if they're all in the first one. They eat your eyes, they eat your nose. There are scary stories about all kinds of things. The ones told here are about a grave, a witch, a man who liked to swim, a hunting trip, and a market basket. There also is one about worms eating a corpse. Your corpse. The Girl Who Stood on a Grave. This is probably one of my favorite urban legends. Some boys and girls were at a party one night. There was a graveyard down the street, and they were talking about how scary it was. "Don't ever stand on a grave after dark," one of the boys said. "The person inside will grab you. He'll pull you under." "That's not true," one of the girls said. "It's just a superstition." "I'll give you $1 if you stand on a grave," said the boy. "A grave doesn't scare me," said the girl. "I'll do it right now." The boy handed her his knife. "Stick this knife in one of the graves," he said. "Then we'll know you were there." The graveyard was filled with shadows and was as quiet as death. "There is nothing to be scared of," the girl told herself, but she was scared anyway. She picked out a grave and stood on it. Then quickly she bent over and plunged the knife into the soil, and she started to leave. But she couldn't get away. Something was holding her back. She tried a second time to leave, but she couldn't move. She was filled with terror. "Something has got me," she screamed, and she fell to the ground. When she didn't come back, the others went to look for her. They found her body sprawled across the grave. Without realizing it, she had plunged the knife through her skirt and had pinned it to the ground. It was only the knife that held her. She had died of fright. And there she is, screaming. A New Horse was always one of my favorites too, so I guess I'm reading 2 in a row. A New Horse. 2 farmhands shared a room. One slept at the back of the room, the other slept near the door. After a while, the one who slept near the door began to feel very tired early in the day. His friend asked what was wrong. "An awful thing happens every night," he said. "A witch turns me into a horse and rides me all over the countryside." "I'll sleep in your bed tonight," his friend said. "We'll see what happens to me." About midnight, an old woman who lived nearby came into the room. She mumbled some strange words over the farmhand, and he found he couldn't move. Then she slipped a bridle on him, and he turned into a horse. The next thing he knew, she was riding him across the fields at breakneck speed, beating him to make him go even faster. Soon they came to a house where a party was going on. There was a lot of music and dancing. They were having a big time inside. She hitched him to a fence and went in. While she was gone, the farmhand rubbed against the fence until the bridle came off, and he turned back into a human being. Then he went into the house and found the witch. He spoke those strange words over her, and with the bridle he turned her into a horse. Then he rode her to a blacksmith and had her fitted with horseshoes. After that, he rode her to the farm where she lived. "I have a pretty good filly here," he told her husband, "but I need a stronger horse. Would you like to trade?" The old man looked her over, and he said he would do it, so they picked out another horse, and the farmhand rode away. Her husband led his new horse to the barn. He took off the bridle and went to hang it up, but when he came back, the new horse was gone. Instead, there stood his wife with horseshoes nailed to her hands and feet. Room for one more. This is a classic one too. A man named Joseph Blackwell came to Philadelphia on a business trip. He stayed with friends in the big house they owned outside the city. That night, they had a good time visiting, but when Blackwell went to bed, he tossed and turned and couldn't sleep. Sometime during the night, he heard a car turn into the driveway. He went to the window to see who was arriving at such a late hour. In the moonlight, he saw a long black hearse filled with people. The driver of the hearse looked up at him. When Blackwell saw his hideous face, he shuddered. The driver called to him, "There is room for one more." Then he waited for a minute or two and he drove off. In the morning, Blackwell told his friends what had happened. "You were dreaming," they said. "I must have been," he said, "but it didn't seem like a dream." After breakfast, he went into Philadelphia. He spent the day high above the city in one of the new office buildings there. Late in the afternoon, he was waiting for an elevator to take him back down to the street, but when it arrived, it was very crowded. One of the passengers looked out and called to him. "There is room for one more," he said. It was the driver of the hearse. "No thanks," said Blackwell. "I'll get the next one." The doors closed and the elevator started down. There was shrieking and screaming, then the sound of a crash. The elevator had fallen to the bottom of the shaft. Everyone aboard was killed. That one is definitely stuck with me my whole life. Okay. The Wendigo is a really nice one. I like it a lot. But it's pretty long. Other dangers. Most of the scary stories in this book have been passed down over the years, but the ones in this chapter have been told only in recent times. They are stories that young people often tell about dangers we face in our lives today. The Hook. I love this story. It was probably the story that scared me the most in this book. And it's one of my favorite urban legends. Donald and Sarah went to the movies. Then they went for a ride in Donald's car. They parked up on a hill at the edge of town. From there they could see the lights up and down the valley. Donald turned on the radio and found some music, but an announcer broke in with a news bulletin. A murderer had escaped from the state prison. He was armed with a knife and was headed south on foot. His left hand was missing. In its place, he wore a hook. "Let's roll up the windows and lock the doors," said Sarah. "That's a good idea," said Donald. "That prison isn't too far away," said Sarah. "Maybe we really should go home." "But it's only 10 o'clock, said Donald. "I don't care what time it is," she said. "I want to go home." "Look, Sarah," said Donald, "he's not going to climb all the way up here. Why would he do that? Even if he did, all the doors are locked. How could he get in?" "Donald, he could take that hook and break through a window and open a door," she said. "I'm scared. I want to go home." Donald was annoyed. "Girls always are afraid of something," he said. Mild sexism shows him. Girls always are afraid of something," he said. As he started the car, Sarah thought she heard someone or something scratching at her door. "Did you hear that?" she asked as they rode away. "It sounded like somebody was trying to get in." "Oh, sure," said Donald. Soon they got to her house. "Would you like to come in and have some cocoa?" she asked. "No," he said, "I've got to go home." He went around to the other side of the car to let her out. Hanging on the door handle was a hook. The white satin evening gown. This one's a really, really pretty illustration too. I probably shouldn't say pretty, it's supposed to be creepy, but it is really pretty. High beams. This one's a bit longer too, but it's one of my favorites. The The girl driving the old blue sedan was a senior at the high school. She lived on a farm about 8 miles away and used the car to drive back and forth. She had driven into town that night to see a basketball game. Now she was on her way home. As she pulled away from the school, she noticed a red pickup truck follow her out of the parking lot. A few minutes later, the truck was still behind her. I guess we're going in the same direction, she thought. She began to watch the truck in her mirror. When she changed her speed, the driver of the truck changed his speed. When she passed a car, so did he. Then he turned on his high beams, flooding her car with light. He left them on for almost a minute. He probably wants to pass me, she thought, but she was becoming uneasy. Usually she drove home over a back road. Not too many people went that way. But when she turned onto that road, so did the truck. I've got to get away from him, she thought, and she began to drive faster. Then he turned his high beams on again. After a minute, he turned them off. Then he turned them on again and off again. She drove even faster, but the truck driver stayed right behind her. Then he turned his high beams on again. Once more, her car was ablaze with light. What is he doing? She wondered. What does he want? Then he turned them off again. But a minute later, he had them on again, and he left them on. At last, she pulled into her driveway, and the truck pulled in right behind her. She jumped from the car and ran to the house. "Call the police!" she screamed at her father. Out in the driveway, she could see the driver of the truck. He had a gun in his hand. When the police arrived, they started to arrest him, but he pointed to the girl's car. "You don't want me," he said. "You want him." Crouched behind the driver's seat, there was a man with a knife. As the driver of the truck explained it, the man slipped into the girl's car just before she left the school. He saw it happen, but there was no way he could stop it. He thought about getting the police, but he was afraid to leave her, so he followed her car. Each time the man in the back seat reached up to overpower her, the driver of the truck turned on his high beams. Then the man dropped down, afraid that someone might see him. To this day, I still check the back seat of my car because of this story or urban legend. There's another version of it where there's a killer in the back seat at a gas station, and the gas station attendant gets them to come inside. I don't know if that's in these books or not, but that's another one of my favorite urban legends. The Babysitter, a classic. There's been many movies, well, not many movies, but several movies made about this one. I think I'll read it. The Babysitter. It was 9 o'clock in the evening. Everybody was sitting on the couch in front of the TV. There were Richard, Brian, Jenny, and Doreen, the babysitter. The telephone rang. "Maybe it's your mother," said Doreen. She picked up the phone. Before she could say a word, a man laughed hysterically and hung up. "Who was it?" asked Richard. "Some nut," said Doreen. "What did I miss?" At 9:30, the telephone rang again. Doreen answered it. It was the man who had called before. "I'll be there soon," he said, and he laughed and hung up. "Who was it?" the children asked. "Some crazy person," she said. About 10 o'clock, the telephone rang again. Jenny got to it first. "Hello," she said. It was the same man. "1 more hour," he said, and he laughed and hung up. "He said 1 more hour. What did he mean?" asked Jenny. "Don't worry," said Doreen. "Don't worry," said Doreen. "It's somebody fooling around." "I'm scared," said Jenny. About 10:30, the telephone rang once more. When Doreen picked it up, the man said, "Pretty soon now," and he laughed. "Why are you doing this?" Doreen screamed, and he hung up. "Was it that guy again?" asked Brian. "Yes," said Doreen. "I'm going to call the operator and complain." The operator told her to call back if it happened again, and she would try to trace the call. At 11 o'clock, the telephone rang again. Doreen answered it. "Very soon now," the man said, and he laughed and hung up. Doreen called the operator. Almost at once, she called back. "That person is calling from a telephone upstairs," she said. "You better leave. I'll get the police." Just then, a door upstairs opened. A man they had never seen before started down the stairs toward them. As they ran from the house, he was smiling in a very strange way. A few minutes later, the police found him there and arrested him. This chapter has the same title as the first chapter, but the stories in the first chapter are meant to scare you. The ones in this chapter are meant to make you laugh. The Viper. This was probably one of my favorites too. A widow lived alone on the top floor of an apartment house. One morning, her telephone rang. "Hello," she said. "This is the Viper," a man said. "I'm coming up." Somebody is fooling around, she thought, and hung up. A half hour later, the telephone rang again. It was the same man. "It's the Viper," he said. "I'll be up soon." The widow didn't know what to think, but she was getting frightened. Once more the telephone rang. Again it was the Viper. "I'm coming up now," he said. She quickly called the police. They said they would be right over. When the doorbell rang, she sighed with relief. "They are here," she thought. But when she opened the door, there stood a little old man with a bucket and a cloth. "I am the Viper," he said. "I wish to wash and wipe the windows." A slithery D, he came out of the sea. He ate all the others, but he didn't eat me. A slithery D, he came out of the sea. He ate all the others, but he didn't eat. Slurp. Should I make a slurping noise? He ate all the others, but he didn't eat. Wait till Martin comes. I really like this illustration. An old man was out for a walk. When a storm came up, he'd look for a place to take shelter. Soon he came to an old house. He ran up on the porch and knocked on the door, but nobody answered. By now, rain was pouring down, thunder was booming, and lightning was flashing, so he tried the door. When he found it was unlocked, he went inside. Except for a pile of wooden boxes, the house was empty. He broke up some of the boxes and made a fire with them. Then he sat down in front of the fire and dried himself. It was so warm and cozy that he fell asleep. When he woke up, a black cat was sitting near the fire. It stared at him for a while, then it purred. "That's a nice cat," he thought, and he dozed off again. When he opened his eyes, there was a second cat in the room, but this one was as big as a wolf. It looked at him very closely and it asked, "Shall we do it now?" "No," said the other cat. "Let's wait till Martin comes." "I must be dreaming," thought the old man. He closed his eyes again, then he took another look. But now there was a third cat in the room, and this one was as big as a tiger. It looked the old man over and it asked, "Shall we do it now?" "No," said the others. "Let's wait till Martin comes." The old man jumped up, jumped out the window, and started running. "When Martin comes, you tell him I couldn't wait," he called. The Ghost with the Bloody Fingers. A businessman arrived at a hotel late one night and asked for a room. The room clerk told him the hotel was all filled up. "There's only one empty room," he said, "but we don't rent that." "There's only one empty room," he said, "but we don't rent that one because it is haunted." "I'll take it," said the businessman. "I don't believe in ghosts." The man went up to the room, he unpacked his things, and he went to bed. As soon as he did, the ghost came out of the closet. Its fingers were bleeding, and it was moaning, "Bloody fingers, bloody fingers." When the man saw the ghost, he grabbed his things and ran. The next night, a woman arrived very late. Again, all the rooms were taken except the haunted room. "I'll sleep there," she said. "I'm not afraid of ghosts." As soon as she got into bed, the ghost came out of the closet. Its fingers still were bleeding. It still was moaning, Bloody fingers, bloody fingers. And the woman took one look and ran. A week later, another guest arrived very late. He also took the haunted room. After he unpacked, he got out his guitar and he began to play. Soon the ghost appeared. As before, its fingers were bleeding and it was moaning, "Bloody fingers, bloody fingers." The man paid no attention. He just kept strumming his guitar, but the ghost kept moaning and its fingers kept bleeding. Finally, the guitar player looked up. "Cool it, man," he said. "Get yourself a Band-Aid." That's it. That's the last story in this first book. And here are all of the different articles and sources he pulled from. And some of these actually have more explanations for the stories. The White Wolf. This is a retelling of an incident reported by Ruth Ann Music in the Telltale Lilac Bush and Other West Virginia Ghost Stories. The Guess. This story has been told in many places. At one time, it was well known in the area around Albany, New York. The version in this book is based on two sources. The recollection of my wife, Barbara Carmen Schwartz, who grew up in the Albany area, and an account reported by Louis C. Jones in Things That Go Bump in the Night. Dr. Jones's informant was Sonna Cooper. But yeah. It says ages 9 and up, but that seems a little young for me. Is the very first Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. That was Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark by Alvin Schwartz with the drawings by Stephen Gamble. I hope you enjoyed it. And please like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you in the next Scary Stories video. Bye, 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 bye.